Live from Bryant-Denny Stadium with special guests, feature stories, and a comprehensive look at Alabama's upcoming game. This is Crimson Tide Kickoff on WVUA 23.
And good morning, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of Crimson Tide Kickoff right here live from our WVUA 23 studios inside the Digital Media Center at Bryant-Denny Stadium. We are ready to preview Alabama and Florida, so let's go. And as always, we begin with our Bama Headlines.
For the latest on the Crimson Tide, you don't need the newspaper. You need Bama Headlines.
All right, since Nick Saban arrived in Tuscaloosa, this series has shifted. The Gators have lost 7 in a row to Alabama. Now, this is the first time the schools will play in the regular season since 2014. That was in Tuscaloosa. It's the first time they're playing at the Swamp since 2011. Florida's most recent win over Alabama came back in the 2008 SEC Championship game. Tim Tebow was the quarterback. Now, this is a weird stat. Florida's been number 1 in the Swamp, but the last time that a visiting team played in the Swamp that was ranked number 1 was 1959 LSU. That's hard to believe, but you know, Alabama doesn't go down there very often. Both Alabama and Florida fans are in wait-and-see mode in terms of the injury report. Florida quarterback Anthony Richardson, that dynamic dual threat, left last week's win over USF with an apparent leg injury. Some people are saying it's a tightened hamstring. Alabama outside linebacker Will Anderson Jr. is also dealing with a lower leg injury that he suffered against Mercer. Both Richardson and Anderson were able to practice this week, though my expectation is that they'll play in the game. We'll discuss Alabama's impressive depth at running back and how all the players at that position are unique, plus interviews with new Alabama soccer coach Wes Hart. Former Alabama offensive lineman Griff Redmill remembers the Tide's epic upset in Gainesville back in 1999. Plus, we'll talk with Graham Hall of the Gainesville Sun, the color commentator from, he works for Florida football, covering the Gators. That'll be in our Behind Enemy Lines segment. That's coming up. Well, this was the scene outside the Mal Moore complex on Friday. Alabama football getting on the buses for the short trip over to the airport, then the flight to the Gainesville area. You saw Will Anderson. He looks good to go. There's DJ Dale, the defensive tackle. Offensive line coach Doug Marrone and his good friend, offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien, they are getting on the bus together. Bryce Young, you know, I've talked about how cool, calm, and collected this guy is. Look at even getting on the bus. He's laid back and cool. He was the last player on because then there comes the coach, Nick Saban, and when he gets on the bus, you know what's going to happen? They're pulling out, so you better be on there and ready to go. Well, speaking of Bryce Young, the sophomore quarterback will have to deal with his first true road game experience, and he'll do it at the Swamp against number 11, Florida. 90,000 plus fans will be in Ben Hill Griffin Stadium trying to throw off Young's rhythm and cadence and, of course, make the Alabama offense that usually runs so smooth be sporadic. Now, Young's never had to deal with an environment like the Swamp, but he believes communication will be the key, and if they handle that well, they'll leave Gainesville with a win.
Yeah, that's always important when you go into a hostile environment like we're going to go into this weekend. We know the environment we're going to go into. We know the challenges ahead of us, and us all as an offense and us as a team being on the same page is going to be really big for us. We have to make sure we're communicating well, make sure that through the week that we're getting the reps we need to get so that we're prepared for Saturday. So that's something that's going to come and develop and something we're going to really be emphasizing this week.
And they did emphasize it. You know, they're going to have to go on silent count, communication, hand signals, all those things. They have used the noise. They've piped it in, but you just can't prepare for it like you have to deal with it when it happens in person. But Alabama will be prepared. We'll see how they handle it this afternoon. Well, the Crimson Tide, due to COVID last season, hasn't played a true road game in a full-capacity stadium since the Iron Bowl in 2019 at Jordan-Hare Stadium in Auburn. That, of course, as we said, changes today. And Crimson Tide players got almost as many questions about the atmosphere as they did the Florida football team this week. Team leaders like John Mechie III and Jordan Battle were freshmen in 2019. They did not have as big a roles then. Mechie admits that this is a new experience, but he says the team will be ready to tackle the challenge just like all the other challenges that they face at Alabama.
Last year it was a COVID year, so it really wasn't much of difficult environments. I guess being a COVID year, that was kind of difficult, but I can't really recall much from my freshman year either. So I think this is kind of my first real college football season as well.
Their offense is explosive, just how it was last year, but preparing for two quarterbacks who kind of have the same style and great at what they do, throwing the ball and running the ball. We have to just work on, staying on and locking on to our guys and scramble drills and all of that kind of stuff.
All right, Florida head coach Dan Mullen talked about Anthony Richardson this week. The feeling is that he should be able to play. Boy, he is some kind of special athlete. He did pull up lame on an 80-yard touchdown run. You see it right there, kind of grabbing that hamstring. But in this week's Wednesday press conference, Mullen confirmed that he should be ready to go today. Richardson will be a big part of that two-quarterback game plan along with Emory Jones as they try to attack that Alabama defense. The injury update on Gators linebacker Ventrell Miller, though, is not good if you're a Florida fan. Miller, number 51, who is a terrific player and a leader, will reportedly miss the rest of the season after suffering a torn biceps tendon in the win over South Florida last weekend. He led the team in tackles last season, and this year was the player that called the signals and made sure the defense was lined up correctly on each play. That's a big loss for Florida. Remember, though, Chris Allen is out for Alabama. Here are some of the numbers to keep an eye on this afternoon. Both of the offenses are clicking. Alabama's rolled up 400-plus yards in 19 straight games. Florida has 12 consecutive games of over 400 yards of total offense. Alabama's won 31 straight games over SEC East teams. The last loss coming 2010 at South Carolina against Steve Spurrier and the Gamecocks. That is a remarkable stat when you think about how good this conference is. And Alabama head coach Nick Saban is 10-0 against Florida head coach Dan Mullen all time. Of course, 9 of those victories for Saban came while Mullen was the head coach at Mississippi State. And then last year in the SEC championship game in December, Alabama and Saban bested Mullen in the Gators. Today's game is scheduled for 2:30 p.m. Central Time. It's the first CBS national game of the week. Now, we know we're dealing with rain and humidity here. It is going to be a factor down there in Gainesville today for sure. Brianna Duncan joins us here at the Weather Center for an update. Brianna, what is the weather looking like at the swamp? Is it going to be a swamp later on today?
Honestly, Gary, absolutely. It's already a swamp here in Tuscaloosa. I've already got my ponytail on. It's like what I like to call ponytail weather here in Tuscaloosa right now. Looking kind of quiet, but I'm sure things will get a little bit more exciting later on in the afternoon as the game begins to take off here in Tuscaloosa as people begin to have watch parties. In the swamp, you can see starting off rainy, muggy conditions all throughout the day really is going to be expected. At 12, expect temperatures in the lower 80s, and we'll get into the mid to upper 80s around kickoff. Cooling off again in Gainesville into the lower 80s, but rain, muggy conditions remain. You can kind of see this here as we look towards the southeast, this rain moving toward our area and our friends down in Florida. So if you are in Florida for the game, or if you're here in Tuscaloosa, rain is expected. We talked about being muggy. We're at a 75 at our muggy meter, pushing tropical. Definitely going to be some hairspray weather, and you're going to want to pack your umbrella if you're out this evening. It's going to be a rainy, muggy, and a stormy day overall. Temperatures across central Alabama pretty mild right now. Tuscaloosa 82, Birmingham, other parts in the eastern parts of our state in the lower to mid 70s. Back to you, Gary.
Thank you, Brianna. So it's going to be sticky in the swamp, but it's sticky here too. It's just sticky all over the southeast. It's September in the southeast. That's what we deal with. Thank you for that update. We'll check in with you again a little bit later on. And when we return, an update on defensive end Will Anderson and his lower leg injury. Also, WVOA 23's Dylan Morgan does a deep dive on Alabama's Australian rugby style punter James Burnap. Stay tuned for more CTKO right after this. And we've also, we got more coming up too. We'll have a highlight, the Crimson Tide's running back room. It is very, very strong. More coming up after the break.
You're watching Crimson Tide Kickoff on WVUA 23.
But from an injury standpoint, Will Anderson has been very encouraging. We feel a little more encouraged than maybe after the game.
Earlier, Will Anderson Jr., that outstanding sophomore outside linebacker, edge pass rusher, able to practice this week. He did have a lower leg injury sustained against Mercer when a running back dove into his right knee, but it looks like he's going to be able to go. He's an All-American, preseason All-American, and a great player. If he can't play, then Chris Braswell will have to step in along with true freshman Dallas Turner to cover his loss. But I got a feeling he's going to go. And welcome back to Crimson Tide Kickoff. I'm Gary Harris. As expected, after 3 years really 4 years as a top backup. Brian Robinson is now the man in the running back order for Alabama this season. Also true to form, others have been giving opportunities at running back. Through the first 2 games, no Alabama RB has more than 22 carries. That's Robinson's total. But Jace McClellan, Roydell Williams, and Trey Sanders have carried it at least 10 times as well. And that is just on handoffs. All of the running backs are capable in other phases of the game as well, including pass catching, of course. Earlier this week, Robinson gave his scouting report of the other running backs that he plays with on the roster.
So Jay's kind of one of those strong, physical guys with speed. Roydell is more like small, bowling ball, but fast type of style. And you got Trey with the bigger size frame, so he's a more physical, should I say, and he's also fast. The whole room pretty much, has nice speed to everyone, and everyone also, has great size to them. So that's what makes our room so physical.
Yeah, the numbers show you the balance that Alabama's had. You see Robinson's total, 22 carries for 130 yards, 5.9 per. And a touchdown. Trey Sanders has 15 runs for 71 yards, 4.7 yards per carry with a touchdown. Jace McClellan, 13 for 49, 3.8 with a touchdown. And Roydell Williams has 10 carries for 29 yards and has yet to score a touchdown. Well, Bama fans, like to think about having that one special running back, but that's not always the case here. The 2016 Alabama running game finished the season with some impressive numbers that show Alabama can do it by committee. Jalen Hurts was even involved. Damian Harris posted over 1,000 yards, but there were 4 guys that had more than 500 yards rushing on that team. Hurts, Bo Scarborough, right there, Josh Jacobs. So you have Derrick Henry's, you have Najee Harris's, but you also have years where Alabama spreads it around, and that looks like it's going to be the case in 2021. Well, for the first time in program history, Alabama football has a punter from down under. That, of course, means he's from Australia, which is a trend we've seen across college football, commonly referred to as rugby style. CTKO's Dylan Morgan has more on how Alabama has had a little bit of fun with that phrase, rugby style.
Up until 2 weeks ago in Atlanta, James Burnip had never played an organized snap of American football. During fall camp, Tide head coach Nick Saban's deadpan delivery left some people wondering if the Tide punter was really getting coached up by this Alabama club team.
Well, we basically have him, going over with the rugby team every day so he can play rugby and feel more comfortable, doing that. Since we're so worried about him playing football. So, he's doing really well with the rugby part of it, so we'll see how that goes. But he's made a lot of improvement and a lot of progress in terms of feeling comfortable, and he does have a variety of ways that he can punt the ball, and he's pretty effective at it.
And surprised to even get the recognition from someone like Coach Saban, the UA Club rugby team was just excited to get the shout out.
Yeah, I mean, the team's reaction was almost immediate, blowing up our group chat. Guys were just so excited that we got that type of recognition. I'm sure if you asked the average person, they wouldn't even know that there was a rugby team at Alabama. So even though it was in a joking fashion, we'll take any publicity we can get.
And even gave some analysis on Burnip's game so far.
Oh, it was great getting to see it. It's always awesome seeing rugby style translate a bit more into football. Great seeing him kick. I do some kicking out here, and he can boot it twice as far as I ever could. So it's pretty cool being overshadowed like that. But it's just great seeing more rugby guys come out and play football here in the U.S.
Burnip showed much improvement between games 1 and 2, with all 3 of his punts going over 40 yards last week against Mercer. And Tide fans have a reason to be hopeful, as Burnip comes from the renowned Pro Kick Australia program, which has produced 3 of the last 7 Ray Guy Award winners. Reporting for CTKO, I'm Dylan Morgan.
Thank you, Dylan. Great piece. And I, too, am happy to see those rugby guys get some recognition. They're not on scholarship. It's a club sport, but they are tough. That is a really rough sport, but fun. Coming up on CTKO, what does Alabama head coach Nick Saban have to say about the rivalry that has developed with the Florida Gators? And we'll check in on what else is going around the SEC, including a wideout tonight for Penn State against the Auburn Tigers. Crimson Tide kickoff rolls on right after this.
You know, I think home field advantage is a huge deal, especially now that with fans back in the stadiums. You know, and that's one of the things that makes the SEC tough, that you get that extra support from your fan base and that energy and the fans making it difficult. You know, probably the best atmosphere in college football this Saturday.
Well, Ben Hill Griffin Stadium got a new coat of paint for today's game. Orange end zones and blue outline around the field. That's a change up from the white end zone and orange outline the stadium had for Florida's home opener with FAU earlier this month. And welcome back into Crimson Tide Kickoff. I'm Gary Harris. The SEC's current scheduling format means the Tide and the Gators have not met in the regular season, as we referred to earlier, since 2014 when Alabama won in Tuscaloosa. Today is the first trip to the Swamp for the Tide in a decade. Both head coaches Nick Saban and Dan Mullen are in favor of the SEC changing the schedule and adding more conference games to allow schools like Alabama and Florida to play more often.
It's something that is really exciting. Hopefully the league, with this expansion, looks at, you know, maybe having a lot more rotating games and getting rid of whether it's permanent crossovers or permanent teams that you're playing or however they want to do it to create this excitement for the fan base, because I think it's going to be a great atmosphere on Saturday here in the Swamp, and, you know, probably the best atmosphere in college football this Saturday.
Look, I don't want to get into the whole scheduling thing, but you know, we played 10 SEC games last year. I thought it was great for fans. I thought it was great for the matchups. You know, I've always been one that advocated playing more SEC games in the regular season so that every player and every program would have the opportunity to play every team in the SEC. So, you know, to answer your question, yeah.
Gotta love Coach Saban. I'm not going to get into the whole scheduling thing, but yeah, we need to change it. All right, there's a lot more happening in the SEC today other than Alabama and Florida. And we've got CTKO's Stu McCann right now to take us around the SEC.
Auburn football coach Brian Harsin joked this week the Tigers blew an amp preparing for tonight's whiteout game at Penn State. The Nittany Lions are fired up to give Auburn an experience that leaves their fans, the Tiger fans, saying, quote, "We love our football, but what they do up there at Penn State is special," end quote. Well, it turns out what's not special is Penn State's record in whiteout games, just 8-8, according to Wikipedia. And the only time Penn State called for a whiteout against a SEC team was 2011 against Alabama. The Crimson Tide won 27-11. Mississippi State travels to Memphis, and the Bulldogs' signature cowbell call is not welcome. That's pretty clear. Check out this Twitter exchange. Memphis fan Johnny Memphis tweets at Liberty Bowl Memorial Stadium, "What is the policy on Mississippi State bringing cowbells?" The Liberty Bowl's answer, "Big fat no." South Carolina's coach-turned-quarterback experiment could be over. Gamecocks coach Shane Beamer says he expects quarterback Luke Doty to be 100% recovered from his foot injury for tonight's game at Georgia. So what does that mean for Zeb Noland? On Wednesday, Coach Beamer did not say Doty will start over Noland, the grad assistant turned QB1 that has the Gamecocks a 2-0 record. Coach Beamer did say when Luke Doty is ready to play, Luke will go. Finally, Missouri coach Eli Drinkowitz revealed his plan to get his team dialed in for today's game against FCS opponent Southeast Missouri. Hanging in the locker of every Mizzou player is a list of the 7 FCS teams that have already beat FBS teams this season. Just 2 weeks of football, 7 wins for the FCS. The message, don't get on the list. For CTKO and around the SEC, I'm Stu McCann.
Thank you, Stu. Boy, it's great, SEC football. All right, some games are already in progress this morning with these early 11 a.m. kickoffs. And, of course, today will also feature 2 SEC matchups. Last week we only had 1. We had Kentucky beating Missouri. But this week we've got, of course, Alabama at Florida. Also, Georgia will host South Carolina in an SEC versus SEC matchup. As we run down the rest of the schedule, remember to join Matthew Travis tonight at 10 o'clock on WVUA 23 News for a recap of all of your SEC action. That Stanford-Vanderbilt game and Tulane and Ole Miss, also very interesting matchups. And can LSU put it together? They're 1-1, but even last week in beating McNeese State, they did not look great. And, of course, the first week they got hammered by UCLA. All right, Alabama women's golf opened the season strong in the fall, shooting a team score of 1 under par to finish 4th at the Annika Intercollegiate, which was played earlier this week at Lake Elmo, Minnesota. The 4th place finish is saying a lot. 11 of the 12 teams in the field finished last season ranked in the top 25. The Tide's Polly Mack shot a 3 under par, collecting 16 birdies in the 3-round tournament. Mack finished tied for 8th. Alabama's Benedetta Morosco finished tied for 13th at 1 under par. Well, when we come back, more on a local Paul W. Bryant alum who is giving current Bryant students a reason to yell, "Roll Tide." Also, we'll go behind enemy lines. Our own Matthew Travis spoke with Gainesville Sun reporter Graham Hall to get a closer look at the Florida Gators from that side of the perspective. And conference play is underway for Alabama soccer. Find out the one stat that could give the Tide an edge in the SEC. That and more coming up on Crimson Tide Kickoff. Opened the SEC schedule on Thursday night in Oxford against Ole Miss. And, you know, this Alabama soccer team is close. I mean, it's not like they're going out there and getting blown out in these matches. But once again, they fell. It was 1-1. But in the second half, Ole Miss did what it had to do, got a couple of goals. Tough loss for the Tide, 3-1. And so they start SEC play at 0-1. They play their final non-conference match tomorrow at home against Utah Valley State. And hopefully Alabama will get it going. There's still a lot of SEC soccer ahead. And speaking of the conference schedule, CTKO's Cooper Husky spoke with head soccer coach Wes Hart about the challenge of playing in the SEC.
Thanks, Gary. Alabama soccer is ready to turn their full attention to the Southeastern Conference with the start of SEC play this week. Head coach Wes Hart is here to talk about the challenge. Coach Hart, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be with y'all.
What have you seen so far from the team this season that you have liked?
Yeah, I've liked quite a bit about the team so far. I think we play a good brand of soccer. I think the effort's been fantastic. You know, a few results haven't gone our way, but in those games, I thought we were very competitive, and you know, result could have just as easily gone our way, but thankfully we had a good outing against UAB last weekend, and we're headed into the SEC play with a win under our belt, and excited to take on Ole Miss.
Definitely. So you had that good result against UAB. Earlier this season, you took number 6 TCU to overtime, but fell just short. Even though most people and some people say there are no more moral victories in sports, what were some positive takeaways from the match?
Yeah, I think what I enjoyed about that match was just our willingness and ability to compete with one of the best teams in the country. I thought we played them very evenly. You could probably argue that we had the better of the chances in that game. So, for what it showed us is that we can compete with just about anyone in the country. And I don't see any SEC teams being much better than that TCU team. So I think if we can play like we did against TCU, I think we're going to be quite successful in the SEC.
Through your first 9 games, you have outshot your opponents almost twice as much. Is the number of shots taken in a game something you focus on in practice?
Yeah, but more importantly, probably quality shots. So it's not just about launching shots from just anywhere. So we try to get in good areas of the field. We want to take high percentage shots. But as I kind of alluded to earlier, I think the results haven't necessarily gone our way in a few of the games. But we've felt we've been very even with our opponents, and I believe some of these chances are going to start falling during the SEC play.
And finally, one last question for you, Coach. Now that we are in SEC play, what is the one final thought, the one big key that y'all will be bringing to this game, to these games?
Yeah, I think for us, it's continuing doing what we've been doing. As I've mentioned, we're playing good soccer, and for us, if we come with the attitude and the willingness to compete and fight and battle like we have been, and continue to play the soccer we've been playing, I'm quite confident that results are going to come in the SEC.
Well, Coach Hart, thank you for joining us. Alabama soccer hosts Utah Valley tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. at Alabama Soccer Stadium, the Tide's final non-conference match of the season. Then it's all SEC competition the rest of the way. Reporting for CTKO, I'm Cooper Husky.
Thank you, Cooper and Coach, and great insight there. And I know they say close doesn't count, but I'm telling you, you'd rather lose close than to get blown out. And this Alabama soccer team, I'll repeat, they're close to getting some wins in the SEC. Well, Alabama football is a 15-point favorite on the road in Gainesville. That's a remarkable tribute to just how good Alabama is in terms of national perception. I guarantee you nobody else in the country would be laying double digits down there today. CTKO's Matthew Travis joins us now live in the studio with the scoop. He got behind enemy lines when he spoke to Graham Hall of the Gainesville Sun to get a point of view on Alabama's trip to Gainesville from the swamp side of things. Matthew?
Hey Gary, earlier this week I spoke to Graham Hall of the Gainesville Sun about this afternoon's game, and one of the biggest questions for Florida heading into today's game was whether quarterback Anthony Richardson would be able to play or not, and Hall said if he is available, he could present some major problems for the Tide.
But the big question mark heading into the game, kind of like with Ventrell Miller and the secondary for Florida, is will Anthony Richardson even be available for this game? It's going to be a big question mark over whether he will even play, but if he's on the field come Saturday, he absolutely is a threat to score every single time he's out there.
Hall admitted that this would be a difficult game for the Gators to win and said that if they are going to win this game, they're going to have to be almost perfect and they're going to have to minimize their mistakes.
Well, we all know to beat Alabama, you got to be not only incredibly lucky, but you can't make any mistakes. That margin of error is so slim against a team the likes of Alabama. It's not just Florida, it's the Clemsons, it's the Georgias, it's all these other teams that have to minimize their mistakes.
Like Hall said, the Gators are going to have to be almost perfect to beat Alabama this afternoon. And after watching the Gators against Florida Atlantic and South Florida, Hall is not too confident that the Gators are going to be able to do that in order to pull the upset against the Tide.
After 2 games this season, I'm not convinced that Florida is going to play a clean enough football game to give them a chance to be in position in the fourth quarter, like they kind of were in Atlanta 9 months ago, to possibly pull the upset against the Crimson Tide.
Hall also told me that if quarterback Anthony Richardson doesn't suit up for the Gators, then this could very easily turn into a double-digit win for the Crimson Tide. Reporting for Crimson Tide Kickoff, I'm Matthew Travis.
Thank you, Matthew. Great job. I love the perspective from the other side. Love behind enemy lines. Although cheering for Alabama on game days is nothing new for Paul W. Bryant High School students, the school's named after the Bear, of course, they now have another reason to scream Roll Tide. 2020 alum Brylan Lanier is the first from Paul Bryant High School to become a part of the Crimson Tide football program, and it doesn't stop there. While representing the Tide, Lanier returns to Paul Bryant football practices to help head coach Eldrick Hill and motivate his former high school team as well.
He's come back and the guys all run up to him, all the young guys, they see him with the Alabama gear on. So it's kind of cool, and we've asked him, who's next? You know, and so we're just gonna let it roll like that. We're very proud of Brylan.
And Brylan came into the program just as his older brother left. Josh Lanier had been a walk-on wide receiver, but over the summer signed a scholarship with Jackson State. Prime time. Coach Prime there in Mississippi. Last weekend, Josh got his first touchdown, a 14-year-old catch and run in JSU's 38-16 win over Tennessee State. Through 2 games, Josh Lanier has 11 catches for 107 yards, so he's doing well for the Tigers. Well, coming up on Crimson Tide Kickoff, we'll revisit Alabama's memorable trip to the Swamp back in 1999. I talked to former Crimson Tide offensive lineman Griff Redmill to get a first-hand look back at that huge upset in Gainesville. Also, what do the Florida Gator players have to say about the matchup with #1 ranked Alabama today? Find out when Crimson Tide Kickoff returns right after this on WVUA 23. Welcome back to Crimson Tide Kickoff in our WVUA 23 digital media studios inside Bryant-Denny Stadium. And Alabama will play at Florida this afternoon, as we've talked about, for the first time in 10 years, since 2011. Now, one of the most memorable games ever for Alabama in the Swamp was back in 1999. And joining me now to talk about it is Griff Redmill. He was a junior starting left guard for that '99 SEC championship team. Griff, thanks for joining me, man.
Hey, Gary, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Let's go down memory lane. That 99 team turned out to be special, but we didn't know it then. 2 weeks earlier, you had lost to Louisiana Tech in Legion Field and got booed by some of the fans. The next week, you pulled one out against Arkansas at Bryant-Denny, 35-28. Florida was ranked number 3, so most people assumed that the Gators, who were a powerhouse, not just in the conference but nationally at that time, were going to blow the doors off Alabama, but we know what happened. Sean Alexander scored 4 touchdowns. It went into overtime, and Alabama stunned the Gators 40-39. And, Griff, I think that was the game that kind of was the springboard for you guys to have a great season. I know there are a lot of memories, but what stands out about that game back in 1999?
Well, you're right in your recollection. There weren't very many people in the United States giving us a hope or a prayer. But the 75 guys that got on that plane and the 25 or 30 support staff that got on that plane headed to Gainesville that day, we all knew we could beat them. That Louisiana Tech game, that was a big turning point for us. And nobody likes to lose a ball game,
right?
But it was really kind of a gut check for us. We were a team just kind of finding our way and finding our groove, and that was a turning point for us to lose that game. And like you said, we pulled one out against Arkansas. And even though we hadn't really accomplished a whole lot at that point, there was something brewing in our locker room, and we felt like we could go down to Gainesville and make something special happen, and it really did turn our season around.
Plus, you had number 37, and Sean Alexander was a great football player. I know as an offensive lineman, you loved having him back there, and he had a really special football game that afternoon.
He did. Sean was one of those generational type players that could almost just decide to do something great and do it. And it's a lot of fun to watch and even more fun to block for. A lot of times us offensive linemen, we would, we were less impressed sometimes than others. I can remember, at the one time I said, hey, man, if you can just do this when you want to do it, why don't you just do it every play? Because when you want to do it, it's pretty special. And, we kind of got a laugh out of that. But when he was a big-time player in big-time games. And, without him and without Chris Samuels and without Andrew Zal and some other key guys, that outcome doesn't happen that way in Gainesville in 99.
I remember the Florida fans were in shock that Alabama was even in the game in the fourth quarter. It winds up going to overtime. My recollection is correct. They scored and missed the extra point. So you knew then a touchdown in the extra point would win the game for you. You get the touchdown from Sean, and then Chris Kemp, a lot of people don't remember this, he missed the extra point. Thankfully, Florida was offsides. He got a second chance and barely squeezed it through.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you who remembers it. I do. I remember it like it was yesterday because I thought, we were 2 overtimes in, and it was hot in Gainesville, and we were gassed. And we line up, kick extra point, and you can look back at the video, and I was on the field goal unit too, and see our reaction. It wasn't real positive, but then you see that yellow flag laying there, and Kemp was already running off the field, with his head down. And I think Sean ran out there and was pointing back to the field to say, hey, we got another kick. And almost missed it the other direction, but he didn't. He made the second one. Yeah, and the rest is history. That was a big kick for Chris because he was a Florida boy, and that game meant a lot to him, too.
Absolutely. And for you guys, I mean, listen, like you said, that was kind of the turning point of the season, and you knew you had a lot of football to play. But I remember the celebration. It was special because I think you guys understood where you were and where you wanted to get. But you guys let that one soak in. I remember being out there, you guys on the field, and you're like, yeah, we did something special today. We're going to enjoy it. You really savored that moment as a football team, didn't you?
We sure did. Up to that point, we hadn't had any victories like that. Mm-hmm. And some of us, I was a fourth-year junior, and we had been working and plugging away for these years, and had fairly mediocre, if not poor teams. And you're thinking to yourself, you get this time put in, and it's like you're ready for something special to happen, and you kind of felt like, hey, it finally happened. And so we were going to make the most of that moment and enjoy it.
And as fate would have it, you would only lose one conference game during the regular season. That was to Tennessee. So you wind up facing Florida again December 4th in Atlanta at the Georgia Dome. And even though you had beaten them the first time, I think a lot of people still thought, well, there's no way they'll beat Spurrier twice. Florida was ranked number 5. You guys had a good football team. Everybody knew it. But I think most people expected Florida to win that game. But I sensed that entire week, the confidence you had gained throughout that season and from beating them once, you guys felt like you were going to go in there. I don't know that anybody knew that you were going to beat them 34-7, but you guys were really confident going into that second meeting, weren't you?
Yeah, we were a different ball team mentally. by the end of the year. When we rolled into Gainesville, we were, the first, in the beginning of the year, early in the year, we were going in there on a lot of hope and a lot of, prayers. And by the end of the year, we knew what we had. We knew what we could do, what we were capable of. And you're right. All we heard was, nobody can beat somebody like that twice in 1 year. And we just, in our own locker room, we just thought, why not? Who says you can't do that? And so we were pretty confident going into that game. I don't think we were overly cocky, but we knew we had a special thing with Sean Alexander. And when it came down to a critical situation, our staff came up with a creative way to get the ball in his hands and do whatever we had to do, whether it was pick up a key first down or get a touchdown or make a big play happen. And Andrew Zhao was playing well.
Yep.
And we had some good things going on with Freddie Millens and Antonio Carter. So we had multiple weapons for the first time in a long time that could help us win a game. And so we really we were feeling better going into that second outing than we were the first time.
Yeah, Millens was dynamic. Sean did his thing. The defense was awesome, and you guys blocked your rear ends off. 34-7, Alabama wins the SEC championship. Great going down memory lane with you, Griff. I appreciate it, man.
Hey, anytime. Thanks for having me. Always enjoy it.
And Crimson Tide Kickoff will return right after this timeout. And welcome back to Crimson Tide Kickoff. I'm Gary Harris. As we said earlier, Alabama's the first #1 ranked SEC team to visit Ben Hill Griffin Stadium in Gainesville since 1959 when LSU was #1. And the Crimson Tide, of course, getting the buzz that comes with the #1 ranking. They're used to it. Florida players respect Alabama's greatness and expect nothing less than excellence from the Tide this afternoon. Florida head coach Dan Mullen has lost all 10 previous games that he's coached against Nick Saban, 9 of them at Mississippi State. But the most recent matchup came last December in the SEC championship game. Alabama beat the Gators 52-46 in a wild game, the closest game that Alabama was involved score-wise in all of last year. Last year's result isn't much of a factor today, but the current Florida players have the right attitude take on the top-ranked Alabama Crimson Tide.
15-point underdog, all that stuff. To get tired of it?
Nah, they earned that. They earned that. They're #1 team in the country. They have a great head coach. They have a great football team, great defense, great offense. They're a well-rounded team. They deserve the hype that they're getting. They deserve all. Every comment that's been made is based on Alabama being a great team, which they are.
All we know is they're a physical team, and that's how Alabama ever's been. Physical team. So we come to play hard-nosed football. That's all I got.
Let's talk some volleyball. Alabama opened the Bama Bash last night at Foster Auditorium with a big 4-set win over Houston, giving the Cougars just their second loss of the season. Alabama had 8 aces on serve compared to just 2 for the Cougs. Crimson Tide also had 11 team blocks on defense. The 7th match this season that they've had double-digit blocks. 2 more matches today. As we speak, Alabama's in action against Western Carolina, and then tonight, Crimson Tide plays Tennessee Tech. That match is scheduled for 6 p.m. again at Foster Auditorium. So Alabama volleyball playing well this weekend. And coming up, more Crimson Tide Kickoff right after this. Keep it dialed in to WVUA 23. We'll be back. And we're back on CTKO. I'm Gary Harris. Alabama football means a lot to this West Alabama community, but there's a lot of great stuff going on in Tuscaloosa and the surrounding neighborhoods. CTKO's Jabari Pruitt spoke with Jim Page, the president and CEO of West Alabama's Chamber of Commerce.
Well, Gary, thank you. Of course, we are joined by the president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce of West Alabama, Jim Page. Of course, we are talking about football season being back. Businesses are back and booming. First of all, just talk to me a little bit about how the year is going so far.
Well, obviously, we're not completely out from under the COVID cloud. That's still a challenge in our community, but I can tell you that economic conditions are a lot different than they were a year ago when we were having this conversation. Now that we're having full stadiums again, people are allowed to tailgate again responsibly and safely. I can't underscore enough how much that means to our local business community. Our hotels being full, our restaurants being full, all of our retail shops and others being full. It's a real shot in the arm, and it's, of course, adding to the tax base, but it's a lot better than what we were dealing with a year ago. So we're really excited about football season being here.
Now, with football season back at full capacity, Bryant-Denny Stadium full, businesses back open, really no restrictions maybe except for masks or anything like that. What does that mean for the Chamber of Commerce and its business, and its members, that everything is kind of back to normal?
Well, it's music to our ears after the past 18 months that we've been going through, but again, especially last football season, which was so restricted, and it kept a lot of people from coming to town, and so we didn't see the economic impact that we traditionally do during football season here. So for our organization, which our mission in a nutshell is to improve economic conditions for the entire community, when you take away a major economic driver like football season, it hurts. So having a relatively normal football season again is a huge impact for this community, huge impact for our members, which come in all shapes and sizes in terms of business. And so having a full season is going to be big. And I think the tax receipts for local government will certainly show that this is a much better year than last year was.
Now, when you kind of look at, last year you guys were out, you were helping struggling businesses, going into the football season. Many businesses were not open because they didn't have the staff. How does it feel to see this year you don't really have to do that?
Yeah, really proud of all the efforts that this community made. Certainly the Chamber was in the middle of it, but the city of Tuscaloosa, I can't brag on them enough for stepping up through Restart Tuscaloosa, which was Mayor Maddox's initiative, to invest $1 million into struggling small businesses. And that really was a lifeline that so many restaurants and bars and small mom and pop shops needed in between when they were told to shut down and then being able to access other funds like the PPP that the federal government passed. And so I'm really proud of the role we played of being so fast and proactive in getting them help. And so fast forward a little over a year now, seeing them still open and employing people and full on a Saturday for game day, that's really special, and I'm proud that we were a part of that.
Now, when you look back at last year, how big of a dip that we took last year?
It was significant. It was in the tens of millions of dollars. Obviously, football season wasn't completely shut down, so it wasn't a total loss, but with only a fraction of the stadium being allowed to be full, tailgating being very limited on the quad and other places, it certainly was not the normal $20 million economic impact weekend that a lot of football games have. So it was significant, but the fact that we were able to escape 2020 and it not be a total loss in the community is a godsend, but we certainly expect this football season, especially as we get into SEC play, we think that the tax receipts here in the community are going to get back to pre-pandemic levels, and that's going to be good for everybody in the community.
So right now we're off to a good start.
We are off to a good start. We've got a great team again that's going to have no doubt going to compete for a national championship again, so that brings the fans into the community, and when they're here they spend money, and that's a good thing for everybody.
All right, Jim Page, President and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce of West Alabama. Gary, I'm going to send things back over to you.
Thank you, Jabari, and thank you, Jim. All right, the Alabama hockey team has a big following, but they are a club sport. There are no scholarships, and they have to fund themselves. And with COVID last year, it's been a lot of work to get to the point where they could open the season last night. They've got a GoFundMe page, a fundraiser that's helped them raise money for locker room expenses, and it's been tough. But the GoFundMe now at $10.3 thousand in raised money. They're trying to raise $18,000 total, but they were able to open the season last night in the Iron Cup against in-state rival Auburn, and they won that game 10-2. Here now are Alabama hockey players talking about getting to this point where they could play again.
So there's a lot of stuff where, and if it's not a club sport environment, it gets taken care of. But stuff like this, whether it's ice time or scheduling practice, a lot of the players have to do that, and it really is about the love of the game because it's a really big commitment to make it all work.
Everything you see out here is student done, student raised. It's hard just being a club sport when the school doesn't want to promote you or give you any funds that they like do for the football team, which we're trying to take this program, but it's one day at a time, and for the love of the game, I will do anything I can for this team to make sure it can survive and play in the future.
I love their passion. They've played at the highest level of club hockey since 2015. They've existed as a team since 2005. Of course, no season last year. glad to see them bouncing back. And remember, support them if you would like at their GoFundMe page. They need the financial help. And we'll be back with more CTKO after this. All right, Brianna has a final check of our forecast.
Absolutely, Gary. So we talked about this earlier. Going to be wet, rainy, and stormy in Gainesville. Kickoff being at 2:30. Temperature is going to be in the mid to upper 80s, cooling off into the lower 80s by this evening. Now I wanted to show you this rain that is moving into Florida as well as here in Tuscaloosa. We've seen some flooding in parts of Jefferson and Shelby County already here in Alabama. And going on through the rest of your weekend today, like I said, in the lower 80s. On Sunday, temperature is going to be the lower 80s again for tomorrow, mostly cloudy with those scattered storms. And I'll tell you more about this later, but you're just going to want to keep that umbrella handy until midweek. Back to you, Gary.
Thank you, Brianna. The game's at 2:30 on CBS. Join WVOA 23 News at 10 tonight. Good night, or good afternoon.